see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Eevee and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's your boy Ernie the Blur Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. Before we get to today's video, make sure that you don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tap that notification bell so that way you don't miss out on any videos. And also hit that like button too, because it really helps me out in the algorithm and ensures you get to see more videos just like this one. So today we're going to be talking about Exceptional X-Men number 3. This issue is bringing us that promised interaction between Kitty Pryde and Emma Frost, something that has kind of been bubbling to the surface since pretty much the beginning of issue 1. Emma Frost has been meddling with Kitty Pryde's mind and in a lot of ways trying to keep tabs on her to see what she's up to, and if, for whatever reason, Kitty is getting involved in the teaching of other mutants, she's going to step in and try and give them the best care and education she possibly can. But in this particular instance, we're getting a dynamic of a Kitty who is not wanting to train these children to be child soldiers the way that she was trained, and Emma Frost is pretty much wanting the opposite of that. She does want to train them to be child soldiers, but not because they're children, but because she recognizes that they're going to have to learn how to defend themselves whether they want to or not, because they live in a world that hates and fears them. And while they may disagree on policy and, ideology, the end result is going to come out no differently. Kitty understands that Emma's going to do what she wants. She is going to try and train them to be the heir apparent to the legacy of the X-Men, whether she wants them to be that or not. But these kids actually do, in some ways, want Emma Frost's help, but they also want Kitty's help as well. I do find it interesting, though, that none of the characters seem incredibly familiar with who Emma Frost is. They know who Kitty Pryde is for the most part, but they don't really know who Emma is. And a lot of that might also be by Emma's design, honestly. But it is interesting to me that a lot of them are hearing the phrase White Queen for the first time. I actually do appreciate that Eve even takes this moment to throw out a little bit of commentary on behalf of the new up-and-coming Exceptional X-Men, a lot of them aghast at the idea that a white woman is walking around in 2024 still referring to herself as the White Queen. That said, it's not White Queen in the way that they probably think it is, and in a lot of respects, it was kind of a double entendre even back in the day. But yeah, it's one of those things. I'm actually kind of surprised that White Queen is still a moniker that Emma willingly goes by, but hey, what are you gonna do with that? While normally I don't typically like the superhero misunderstanding trope, it's actually one of my least favorite tropes in all of comics. I think it's one of those tropes that should honestly have died on the vine, and if I could, if I had the power to do so, I would strangle it in its crib. Unfortunately, it's something that we are stuck with, but there is a way to use the trope in a meaningful way that actually works. Just sadly, not everybody does it. Eve actually manages to do it. While yes, Kitty and Emma have the tropey superhero misunderstanding, at the end of it all, it doesn't last very long. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It does all kind of wrap up a little nice and neat, but of course it is, because while yes, Kitty does not trust Emma, and she even admits here she has complicated feelings about Emma, we can't leave out what I talked about in the past couple of videos I've done for Exceptional X-Men. In both cases, I mentioned that Kitty and Emma have a very complicated history with one another. Kitty has known Emma longer than most people. She knew her at a time where she was at the height of her villainy. As a matter of fact, her first introduction to X-Men readers was about the same time that Emma Frost hit the scene. So yeah, it makes sense that these two characters, while yes, they have become friends over the years, there's still a little hint of bad blood between them, or I would even say it's probably more accurate to say that Kitty just knows Emma so well that she just thinks of her as shady. One thing that's really cool here is that once Kitty and Emma put their claws away and decide to actually work together on at least some level, we do get a throwback to Kitty's past. Some of you may remember, if you're old heads like myself, back in the day when Kitty was initially on the X-Men team, she had a hobby that she would partake in when she wasn't out trying to save the world. She took dance lessons from a woman by the name of Stevie Hunter. Well, as it turns out here, there is no Stevie Hunter involved here, but I do feel some Stevie Hunter isms are about to creep in to the story in the best way humanly possible. The whole idea here is that Kitty's roommate, Preeti, she has offered up a dance studio that she owns, and it's something she wasn't using, and it's obviously going to be a huge tax write-off for her. She's going to give this dance studio over to Kitty, and it's so appropriate because of Kitty's past with Stevie Hunter. Stevie Hunter does not come with this dance studio, but I have a feeling, considering some of the words that have been spoken by now X-Men editor Tom Brevoort, he has stated pretty much that Stevie Hunter will probably show up at some point. And at the time, I wasn't even really thinking about where would be the most appropriate place for her to show up, but this would be the most appropriate place for her to appear, not just because it's a dance studio and it's what she used to do, but because it's Kitty and her relationship with her. Even though technically there were some rough spots in there, I still remember very much so the God Loves Man kill scene where Kitty has a pretty much white woman meltdown in front of Stevie Hunter over the prospect of being an lover. That's a whole other story altogether and something that I'll address. I've actually talked about it in a live stream. You can actually go check it out up here, but I'm actually thinking about doing a whole separate video talking about Kitty's liberal usage of the N-word. We'll go back and address that at some point. But yeah, go check out that live stream. It was hilarious and sad all at the same time. I'm curious to see what happens with that. And if Stevie Hunter does show up to the dance studio at some point, I wonder if any of what I just talked about will be addressed at some point. I have a feeling Eve would touch on that on some level. Then again, she may not have time to show up in any of the story, largely because the last time I checked, and this was during the X-Men Gold series when Kitty was leader of the X-Men team, at least that particular X-Men team, Stevie was in politics. She was elected to Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives. So she may not have time, or maybe she will find time. Who knows? But whatever the case is, the Exceptional X-Men are going to be taking up residence in the dance studio and using it as their base of operations and training ground. And while technically they're not intended to be fighting the good fight, they're really just there to learn how to use their powers, because all 3 characters, Trista, Alejandro, and Tao, none of them know how to use their powers on any effective level. They can use them instinctively and accidentally at times. Even by Tao's own admission, she doesn't know how to use her powers on any level other than reflexive. One cool thing about this whole scenario, though, is that it actually gives us a little bit of insight into the characters. That's something I really enjoyed here with this, because one of the funny parts about X-Men is their names. Their names will oftentimes tell you who and what they are right there on the tin. It is also sometimes names can be a little bit of a misnomer depending on the character, and more recently X-Men names have become kind of silly, like even more silly than the original names that we have seen from other original X-Men characters. This group is a little bit different. By and large, I usually just kind of roll my eyes with a lot of new X-Men characters and their names, because sometimes they can be just a little bit too much on the nose. And while yes, these are kind of on the nose for the most part, they do have some actual meaning that makes sense for the characters. Not to say that the other ones don't. Yes, those other characters, you know, yeah, sure. Some of them do have names that make sense, sometimes a little too much sense. Looking at you, Bling, I think that name is still silly and should be changed, but yay, that's another story altogether. Point is, these characters' names make sense for who they are and what they represent, and even their powers. Case in point, it's revealed in this issue that Trista is the one who comes up with everyone's names, and everyone's happy with them, which I actually found refreshing. And in the case of Trista, we'll start with her. We know her name is Bronze, and the reason why she's named Bronze is the color of her skin when she turns into her metal form, even though we already know that the substance her skin turns into is not bronze. Like, it's not the actual bronze metal. It's some other unknown metal that has not been revealed yet. But the point is that, yeah, that's the only reason why her name is exactly that. And, you know, hey, I can work with that. Another one who is a little bit more nuanced, though, is the character Melee, because it doesn't really have anything to do with her powers. It has to do with Tao's personality. The fact that she's ready to fly off the handle and jump into battle, be the first one to throw hands when it's time to fight. That's why her name is Melee. It doesn't have anything to do with her ability to turn invisible or her other secondary ability to phase through solid matter. Doesn't have anything to do with any of it. And then when we get to Alejandro, who is codenamed Axo, this is the one that I was actually kind of confused by at first when it was initially announced, because I was like, I don't get it. I don't know what it was I was even thinking about when I first heard the name. I was like, that name doesn't make sense. I was like, maybe it's a play on something, but I don't know what it is. And in this issue, it's revealed that it's a play on the actual animal, Axolotl, an animal that can change color. And considering that Axo's ability is that he is a human mood ring who changes colors based on the moods of people around him, yeah, his name makes even more sense. Now, some other cool things that come up in this, speaking of Axo, one of the things that was hinted at early on, even prior to his introduction in Exceptional X-Men #2, it was revealed that his power is more than just being a human mood ring and having this uncanny ability that forces people to give up their deepest, darkest thoughts to him or around him. Well, as it turns out, there's another power built within that actually makes his ability a lot more useful than just knowing how everyone feels. This ability is almost sort of a clairvoyance, though not in the strictest sense. Because of his ability to sense the emotions of other people and his skin color reflecting the emotions of people around him, it's through this that he's able to recognize intent, like how he is able to, without looking at Melee, know that she's about to punch something. And it's not because, oh, I know her so well by this point that I just know how she is. It's the fact that he's looking into her mood and reading her emotions 5 steps ahead. This, in a lot of ways, almost functions as a level of active spider sense for him. If someone were to attack him, he would know exactly when they were going to attack and maybe even how. We don't really get too much more information about this, but it's something I feel will definitely get addressed as we go along in the story. Another really cool thing that's baked in these characters is that a lot of them are actually representative of facets of Kitty's personality and even people who Kitty has been connected to. Case in point, Bronze. She is probably, of the 3, the most passive, even maybe a bit more so than Axo. Axo is almost kind of more in the avoidance phase of his teenage years. He doesn't want to be bothered by anyone. He just wants to be left alone. But Bronze doesn't want to hurt anyone. She doesn't want to be a soldier in the traditional sense that, yo, I want to fight people. I want to get in people's faces. No, that's not her thing. She just wants to be able to protect herself and understand her power, but she doesn't want to hurt anyone. She is strictly a pacifist in that regard, though I'm pretty sure when the time comes, she'll throw hands with the best of them. But this makes her in a lot of ways very similar, as Kitty points out, to someone who was at one point in time the love of her life, Colossus, a guy who has a very similar power set to Bronze, minus the whiplashes that Bronze is able to utilize in that form. But the fact that she can turn her skin into metal and become a bit more empowered when she does so is very Colossus. And so too is her personality. At least Colossus, not during the Krakoan era. You look at a character like Tao. Tao is probably the easiest one because back in the day, Kitty used to be a bit of a hothead. She would throw herself headfirst into just about any battle, more or less, and would also be the first to speak up whenever someone said something that she didn't agree with. And Tao is pretty much that, like almost down to the letter. She is basically Vietnamese Kitty Pryde. And you also throw in the fact that she has the exact same power set, also with the added ability that she can turn invisible as well. And it lets you know that, yeah, Kitty probably sees a lot of herself, at least her younger self, in Tao. And honestly, to say otherwise would just be weird. Now, when you get to the part of Axo, Axo is probably the one that's a little bit different. Whereas I feel like Axo is more representative of Kitty now. Like, Axo doesn't want to be bothered. He doesn't want to be caught up in anything. That's basically what Kitty is doing. She's practicing avoidance. She's trying to avoid the X-Men. She's trying to avoid Mutant Crisis. She's trying to just live a normal day-to-day life. I mean, the sheer fact that she's working now as a bartender, just to have something resemblant of a normal life, should tell you a lot. There's a lot of really cool things in this comic. I like what they're setting up. I like what Eve is putting together with this team and kind of showing how Kitty and Emma could work really well together, as being able to train these kids and teach them how to use their powers, and in a lot of ways already are. Just the simple fact that Axo went from having no idea how his powers worked outside of the most basic levels of information, and to this being able to recognize that he can now see into the future based on a person's mood, as well as being able to detect whether anything around them is real or not. When Emma uses her powers to project these little goblinoid creatures to attack the dance studio out of nowhere, which should have also been the first clue that there were shenanigans afoot, Axo's the one using his power reflexively to notice that he's not reading any mood off of any of them. So they must not be real, which he was right. Just in, a few panels of Emma being there, she's already helped them figure things out. Now, granted, she is teaching with a bit more of a heavy hand, and one could easily, even I would make the comparison that Kitty and Emma right now are giving Charles and Magneto vibes, is basically what I'm getting. She's gonna be the softer touch, Emma is gonna be the hard touch. And it's gonna be interesting to see exactly how these two are gonna work together effectively to teach these kids how to do what they need to do.